Pray in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Lord, with your light, your truth, and your peace. Bless our hearts, our minds, our souls, and keep them close to you as we keep close to one another in the church, as we learn our history. Guide us and share what you have given to us. As we pray, glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. So, now it's getting interesting because now we are getting into, of course, we're in the Reformation, and hopefully we will get into the English Reformation. Of course, that affects Ireland, of course, very dramatically, as we'll see. I did a one pilgrimage to Ireland already, and just to give a little background, when I was there, we had the tour guide, and he was a really nice young guy, and he was very devout, and it is a pilgrimage, so we went to Our Lady of Knock, and but every day we went to these churches, and I, by the fourth day, I said, gosh, these are really unimpressive churches. This is Ireland. Where don't we go to see, like big cathedrals and all this kind of stuff? And he looked at me and said, Father, they knocked them all down.
Oh, wow.
And I went, what? So I had no idea that Ireland went through such a persecution. Yeah. And along those lines, I read a book, about talking about the Irish culture. And, for 100, 200 years, the Mass was illegal in Ireland.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you would be killed.
Yes. For
going to Mass. And, so I never understood. Now, this is the story. I'm Irish, my mother's side. And the Father Malloy was the patriarch of the family. And so with all the Irish gatherings from the Malloy clan, we had 200 or 300 people. It's a huge thing. And Father Malloy would do the Mass, Father John, do the Mass. And it was a wee little Mass, So it was short and sweet, and no singing, and just did the Mass out in the field, and that was it. Boom. I was like, So when he retired out, I said, okay, I'm gonna have him sing. Let's start with "Be Not Afraid." And they all looked at me like, what? So nobody sang. And there's a few. I'm like, what the heck? Can't come to find out. Interesting. That for those hundreds of years, now take them over to the bar, those people sing their heads off. When Irish eyes are smiling. What the heck is this about? Culturally, it made such an impression on the Irish. And I remember my grandmother being very upset. Don't make a peep in church. Why? Because they'd blown your head off. Mm-hmm. For hundreds of years, you had to be absolutely silent during the Mass. There was no participation, certainly no singing. But, and I also just got another story of the Irish step dancing.
Yeah,
you weren't allowed to dance. Oh, you told me that one. Yeah, you told me that one. That's right. Yeah, with the window, people wouldn't see them moving, but the feet are going all over the place.
And they had the women had to hold, and the men, they had to keep their arms straight down.
Yeah.
I heard it was because they didn't want the boys and the girls to have any physical contact.
Yeah.
But
So another add-on to that, I thought so. I wanted to confirm it. Is the 12 days of Christmas? Is it says here that from 1558 to 1829, Roman Catholics in England were not allowed to practice their faith openly. During that era, someone wrote the 12 days of Christmas as a kind of secret catechism that could be sung in public without the risk of persecution.
Right. Yeah, so you had all the different hidden meanings of all those, so people can remember their catechism and learn it. So once again, just to start off, that this is hard stuff. This is hard stuff. Terrible history for the body of Christ to have gone through the trauma that it did. So, a lot of times we powder over the Reformation. Certainly, when I was a kid, it was when I went through history classes in the public school. It was seen as a good thing. It was great. It was wonderful. And I'm not so on that page. Not so on that page, because it really is devastating what happened, and people, hundreds, thousands of people, died through these wars and all the rest. So It's hard to look at it. It's hard to, speak, to remember what happened. And thank God, at least now, we're not throwing rocks at each other. This is good. And but this is the history, and this is where these realities happen, that we have so many denominations now in the church, in the Christian community. Okay, so we'll finish up with Ulrich Zwingli. He's another big reformer. He doesn't get a whole lot on the page here, as you can see. It's a paragraph, but once again, we have a priest. All good heretics are priests or bishops. That's the way it usually works. They know enough theology to go wrong. The only exception we just did was Calvin. He wasn't a cleric, but he became, the pastor or the head, the leader of his church in Geneva. But Ulrich Zwingli is a priest. He's a Catholic priest, and he begins another community of people, another church. Also down the road, I don't know if we're going to cover it here, is Menon, Father Menon. He began the Mennonites, so he's another Catholic priest starting his own community. Now, what's unique about, or interesting, all of these folks, when they begin a church, they are beginning a new church and a new organization. These are not separate individual communities that are only this community. They're planning to become missionary in a sense, and it's going to be an organization. It's not going to be just one church. Now, what we have today going on for the last maybe 100 years or so is the growth of what's called non-denominational churches. These are denominations. They're founding a new church, a new denomination, and that's what they're intending to do. And it's going to live on, and it's going to have multiple centers of worship and all this kind of thing. It's not just a non-denominational church. So now what has happened is a lot of the folks are, tired of all the denominations, the denominational fighting, and then they now claim a new thing that has happened within the Christian community is the non-denominational church. So they will be proud to say we don't connect to anybody else. So we are an independent Christian church. So they're founded by a particular person. They might have friendship of fellowship or something with other communities. But what happens in these situations, it is competitive. Who's got the best music, who's got the best preaching, who gets the whatever. But it's not going to be anything liturgical usually. So liturgy and calendar are something we inherited from Judaism. So I want to just look at that again. So what happens in the Mass? Protestants at this point, and a lot of Protestants, are of the opinion that what was retrieved was early Christianity from the 1st century. We're going back, and we're going to do what they did back then because all that Catholic stuff is bad. That was all a corruption. And we want to restore biblical Christianity. Well, what was biblical Christianity? Biblical Christianity is Catholicism. Okay, we were founded by Jesus and the apostles. And these are Jews. Okay, they're Jews. They're not going to do like a Baptist service. They didn't do that. They didn't sit around singing psalms and songs and only. They did that. They prayed, and they would be preaching and teaching, but that they would do the liturgical act. So directly from the Seder, Last Supper, okay, they hear what Jesus did, and they begin to do that on Sundays. Saturdays, the apostles and the first Christians still did do synagogue and still did temple. They went to the temple. But they, as time is going to go by, then Jews are going to push them out of the temple and push them out of the synagogue. Because when Christians begin to say Jesus is Lord, Yeshua Adonai, Christians knew what they were saying. They were saying Jesus is God. And then that was okay. That's how Jesus got arrested, and he was arrested for blasphemy. You make yourself out to be God. So when so at the time of Jesus, there were 2 forms of Jewish worship. Synagogue worship in all the villages, small synagogues, which was essentially like a study hall. They would pray, they would read scripture, there would be preaching and prayers. That's it. Maybe some chanting, some songs. Now then, there's another type of worship, which of course is at the temple in Jerusalem, temple sacrifice. Now they would do sacrifice of lots of things, not just animals, but lots of animals depending on what the sacrifice is about. Big sacrifice, big animal, little sacrifice, little animal. But they would sacrifice also wheat and barley and wine and incense and all kinds of things. So, but there was a time and a place, a liturgy. They would do all this stuff. So the apostles they're not priests of the temple, but they know that. They know what's going on at the temple and participated in whatever ways. So what's interesting is that as the Christian community separates from Judaism, they actually take both forms of worship into what we now have as the Mass. First part, liturgy of the word. What is that? It's synagogue worship. You read text, you have commentary, you have prayers, some songs. Then sacrifice in the temple. Now the liturgy of the Eucharist represents the sacrifice of Christ. Okay? So both forms come into Catholic worship, Christian worship. Now that's going on right away. Now, you hear in St. Paul, hello, Barry, I haven't seen you in a long time.
I haven't seen you in a while. How you been?
Welcome, yeah, come on in.
I
Come
just
in.
have a present for this
Great,
young lady.
thank
Oh.
you.
There's 4 of them there.
Okay, great, thanks.
How you been, all right?
Very good. Yeah, he was one of my former students.
Yeah, I know some of these people.
He graduated, I guess.
Just long time, long day.
Yeah, all right, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, never can tell.
Okay, very
Good to
good.
see you.
Okay, God
Thank
bless.
you.
All
Thanks,
right.
Barry.
Thanks, Barry.
Okay, so both come in very early, right from the start, and we hear that they were doing the Last Supper. They were reenacting the Last Supper, what Jesus did at the last Seder. So that moves right in. And what we hear in the epistles, St. Paul has 2 issues that are problematic, because now they're doing this liturgy, they're doing this thing, and remember, Seder means order. In Hebrew, it means order. So there's 15 steps to a Seder. We do this, we do this, we do this, we do this. All of it is not, it's not happenstance. So there's a liturgy going on. When they would do the liturgy, they would, St. Paul begins to, he deals with it with Corinthians or wherever in the New Testament there, that there's 2 issues happening. There's now Gentiles entering the church, and they're at this meal. Jesus blessed the bread at the beginning of the meal, and then at the 3rd cup, he blesses the 3rd cup. Okay? And there's a meal in the middle. And so there was fellowship, there was eating and drinking. Remember at the Seder, there's 4 cups of wine. They continued that practice. But then St. Paul complains. He says, wait a minute, this is not good. The Jews and the Gentiles are not participating together. So imagine the Jews who now come to Christ, they're Christian, but they're still doing kosher. And these Gentiles bring ham sandwiches. I can't eat with those people. I can't do that. So there would be animosity. Don't bring that in here. Bring vegetarian, it's fine, but you can't do ham sandwiches or whatever, whatever. So kosher was an issue. And then, of course, comes the 4 cups of wine. And St. Paul complains also, some of you people are getting drunk during the Lord's Supper. So what the church does pretty quickly is like eliminate the whole meal. But of course they didn't eliminate the blessing of the cup, of the body, and the blessing of the blood. So now that gets put like that. So you have the liturgy of the word, and then you have the representation of the sacrifice of Christ. And it is important to remember that now we put them together, but it seems at the Last Supper, Jesus blessed the bread first, because that's where the Jews bless the bread. It's at the very beginning of the meal. And there's a blessing on a cup of wine as well, but there's 3 more cups. It seems, because we hear it in the Eucharistic prayer. At the Eucharistic prayer, we say, at the end of the meal, he took the cup. Okay, so that's the third cup that Jesus blessed. And then they went out into the night singing psalms. Those psalms are the Great Hillel, which is Psalms 113 to 118. So they would have known those psalms by heart. They chant the whole, 5 psalms, I think it is. And they go out into night. That's when they go down into the valley and they go over to Gethsemane. So they're singing. So Jesus broke the order, and absolutely startling. So for the Jews, the apostles to understand what's happening. But notice, he blesses the body, and then he blesses the blood an hour later. Okay? So what is that signifying when your body and your blood are separated? Death. Yeah. So already it's prefiguring. Now we put them together and we don't quite see it so much because of the time, putting it together. So Christians from the start were doing liturgy. And so as the Reformation proceeds, all of that gets dropped out. And that's unfortunate. The whole calendar situation, a lot of especially non-denominational churches, they'll celebrate Christmas, they'll celebrate Easter. Now some of them are beginning to restore something like an Advent and something like a Lent. So slowly things are maybe moving. It's interesting. Some of these churches now are doing palms on Palm Sunday, but that used to be seen to be too Catholic to do. You will now see nativity scenes, very interesting, on the front lawn of Baptist churches now at Christmas. Interesting. So they do have a statue of Our Lady and St. Joseph and baby Jesus. Okay, that's interesting. And then ashes too, the use of ashes. So these are actually Jewish things. Now, if you just did Sukkot, you have the palm branches, and you see how that's used ritually. Palm Sunday. We use a lot of stuff that actually has its roots, in Judaism. So the idea is that, in a sense, what they did was de-Judaize the liturgy, and they made it into something really new. That is just a prayer service, So Zwingli is going to do that. He's going to put, all the sacraments are gone, all the good works are gone, the statues are gone, the altars are gone, and so he really, changes the liturgy and everything. So Zwingli is 1484 to 1531. He was the third major reformer and founder of the Reformation in Switzerland. His humanistic studies, being in the university where he studied for the priesthood, led him to study Greek, and he read the classics and the fathers of the church. He became acquainted with and entered into friendly discussions with the leading humanists of his day. Henrik Loridi, I don't know some of these people. Yeah, we're gonna go into that. So Erasmus and this other, I don't know this other fellow either, Vadian, but Erasmus certainly is known. So humanism is a return to the study of humanity. Who is the human person? What is the human person? So humanism takes the move that in the Middle Ages they began to really look at humanism and say, where did we come from? Who are we? Where are we? And the Catholics had a very particular idea of humanism. They were made in the image and likeness of God. Where did we get that one from? The Jews. Okay, so there's a Jewish humanism, there's a Catholic humanism, and a Protestant humanism. There's atheistic humanism, there's secular humanism, and that all has different opinions, usually, certainly, involving origins. Where do you think it came from? So the way I describe some atheists or whatever, the secular humanists will say, the way I say it is, we're slime from a swamp. Basically, we crawled out of a swamp somewhere, and through evolution, here we are. And where we're going, back to the swamp. So it's our greatest hope is recycling. We can recycle. So not appealing to me. Not appealing. So But humanism comes into the church, and there is Catholic humanism that really begins to study the human person. So, whereas art had been really biblical and saints and all the rest, now art's starting to look at just ordinary people, painting pictures of baskets of fruit and landscapes and all the rest. So it's not just about religious stuff, it's on earthly, paying attention to the world. Well, that's a good thing. Catholics embraced Catholic humanism, but they don't embrace all the others, because there's going to be differences. So he is infected by the humanistic teachings, but goes into a Protestant direction. So before long, he converted many of his faithful to his increasingly anti-Catholic views of church-state relations, the veneration of the saints, the removal of images, good works, and the sacraments. With much political power behind him, he used the state to seize church property, suppress the Mass and sacraments, such as penance and the anointing of the sick, destroying images, statues, relics, altars, and organs, regardless of even their artistic value, and melt down chalices and monstrances into coins. So all this stuff is happening, and we kind of went through it recently ourselves in some ways. But so Zwingli was able to establish and stabilize the Reformation during his lifetime. So he's another one that follows Calvin and follows Luther, especially with getting rid of all the material stuff. Now, again, as Catholics, we do matter and spirit, and sacraments operate matter and spirit. They all have a physical aspect and they have a spiritual aspect. And because God is going to work on us on both levels. So, all the sacraments is always a physical aspect and a spiritual reality. So in baptism, you get wet. In Eucharist, you eat and drink. So all of the sacraments get anointed with the oil, confirmation. So all the sacraments now, though, are now seen to be ineffective, useless, and we don't do them anymore. So this is obviously changing the faith, changing Catholic faith. And so here we go. So Luther made the first step with the sacraments, messing around with them, basically saying there was two sacraments. So he agreed that there would be two. And then Calvin comes along and says none, zero. You can do the Lord's Supper, but it's just bread and wine that we're remembering what Jesus did. So there's nothing sacramental happening at that. So, all right, so this is now the end of what we're doing here with what's going on the continent of Europe. And it's basically in the German regions where it starts, in Switzerland. Certainly it goes to France, and it is going to go to England, eventually. But right now, the turmoil and the wars that are happening are in Germany. Okay? Now, enter the English Reformation. So a whole nother story, So as we're going to hear, when we take a look at the text, England was doing very well. The church was very strong, people were pious, the clergy was okay. So in England, there was not, how the church broke off wasn't for theological reasons. The sacraments were fruitful, everybody's doing the Catholic stuff, but now this issue is going to be church authority. Who rules the church and who has authority in the church. So this is going to be a big deal. I'm sure you know a little bit about Henry VIII. Okay, so that's the 7 wives, 6 wives, 7, I don't know, something like that. A bunch of wives. So this is going to be the issue, and we get into the details here. It is important to see exactly, what happened as it all developed. So, but it's not, the important point is that it's not about theology. Now, so this is how, at this point in time, Episcopal, the Anglican or the Episcopal Church here in America and throughout the world is pretty Catholic. They do the Eucharist, they have priests, they have bishops, there is more of a Catholic look to Anglican, it's the Anglican experience. So they weren't throwing out the sacraments, they weren't throwing out a lot of Catholic stuff, they retained it. Now what's going to happen, that is going to shift depending on who's on the throne as the century is going to go by. Okay? So it goes back to Catholic, back to Protestant, more radical Protestant, back to Catholic, back to more Protestant, to the point today where you really, it is kind of a interesting thing that there can be so much of a difference between two Episcopal churches. Some could be very high church and some very low church. Some Episcopal clerics will say, I'm a minister, Episcopal minister. Most these days are saying priest. But once you use that word, a priest offers sacrifice, and then you get into the sacramental mindset. But a pastor or a minister is about liturgy of the word. You might think of it that way. Those folks are going to be doing biblical emphasis. Okay?
Oh, so if you're a minister, you don't do the body of Christ? You don't do communion?
Well, yeah, for the most part, you might say that. If the clergy person says, I'm a minister, probably not liturgical so much. But that's going to be, well, okay. We're still in the idea that we have a denomination. So there's supposed to be cohesion in your denomination. But especially Episcopal, they are really diverse. So there are still Episcopal ministers, Episcopal clergy that call themselves minister, will call me pastor, don't call me father. More, but they would refer to themselves sometimes as pastor and minister or priest. Now that's a whole big discussion. We'll get into that a little bit maybe later if we have time. Okay, so the last of the movements to bring about a Protestant revolution occurred in England. The spread of Protestantism in England did not originate from theological or dogmatic issues, but over the issue of papal authority, specifically regarding the issue of the king's marriage, and later the English monarch as the head of the Church of England. So to this day, the head of the Church of England is whoever, now it's King Charles. Okay, he's the head of the church. He makes determination of, well, pretty much it's a figurehead these days. I don't think he was going to be very involved. His mother certainly was a little bit more involved in church things, it seems. So I don't know. We'll see how this is. Obviously something's changing after all these years now with Charles on the throne. Now we'll see what happens. But they do have an Archbishop of Canterbury, and he's the head of the church, of the English church. So the Catholic Church in England at the beginning of the 16th century was in better condition than in any country in Europe, save Spain. So Spain is, seriously Catholic. There's not a big Protestant revolution in Spain. That's all taking place in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Okay, so Spain has been preserved a little bit too, and was doing relatively well. So relations between the clergy and the laity were very good. There were relatively few clerical scandals, and there was popular support for the religious and the church in general. So the religious orders are all thriving, they're doing okay, monasteries, convents, religious life is okay. So a visitor to the British island at this time could admire the universal observation of Catholic practices and the general manifestation of English piety. Things are doing fine in the church. The king himself had been named protector of the faith by the Pope in 1520 for defending the church against Lutheran attacks in his work entitled Defense of the Seven Sacraments. So King Henry, it's 1520. Everybody knows, hope you remember 1517 is the beginning of the Reformation. October 31st is Reformation Day. All Hallows Eve, Halloween, it's coming up here, all right? So that's the day Luther nailed the theses onto the church door, complaining about what was about to happen on All Saints' Day with the veneration of the saints, the veneration of the relics. He was protesting it. So that officially is the date. Not a whole lot happened that day, of course, but by 1520, the place is rumbling, with the teachings of Luther and discussions, and the whole thing happens that he finally gets excommunicated, and so it's right in the middle of this time. Henry, being a Catholic, being a faithful Catholic, writes a big argument in favor of the sacraments, against Luther. There's not 2 sacraments, there's 7 sacraments. We've had 7 sacraments, and this is the way it is, blah, blah, blah. So the Pope is pleased, and gives him the title, protector of the faith, or defender. Usually it's defender of the faith. So that title was given to Henry VIII and has been kept by all the monarchs since. So it's interesting compared to who the monarch is. And even when Queen Elizabeth was, during her funeral, there was the litany of who she is, and they repeated that title, defender of the faith. I don't know how it applies exactly, how it was given and how it is expressed right now. That's a story. But they still like the title, defender of the faith. So Henry was doing pretty well, and he didn't have any qualms about following Luther. Now a different situation happens, of course. Things evolve in a different way. So the Tudors had come to the throne at the end of the English Civil War, the War of the Roses. This 40-year struggle wrought havoc on the island nation and brought it to the brink of destruction. Henry VII, okay, this is the 7th, okay, Henry VII ended the conflict and restored calm and prosperity to England. He managed to increase his treasury by avoiding war and allying himself with Spain, the strongest European state. His eldest son, Arthur, you gotta pay attention to who's who here. This is gonna be family dynamics 101. This is really, and it puts me in mind really what happened in early Judaism. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob becomes Israel. He gets the name of Israel, but Jacob wants to marry Rachel, but he gets stuck marrying Leah first, okay? And Rachel can't have children, so she has to get a concubine, and Leah does something similar. I don't know how that, but anyway, you got one daddy and 4 mommies, and 12 boys. Okay, so just imagine, holy moly, how that works. And then there's good old Joseph, and Benjamin. So it's going to get messy there. Well, wait till you see how messy it gets here. So, okay. So Arthur, the oldest son, that's the way it works. He's going to be the king. He's the oldest son. He is he's betrothed to Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of the king and queen of Spain. So Catherine of Aragon is Ferdinand and Isabella's, daughter. Now, we've met them before. We've heard about them. Seriously Catholic. Take their monarchy as a Catholic monarch very seriously. They're devout people. They pay attention to the gospel. They try to make their kingdom a Christian kingdom and all the rest. So, and exactly, already, remember, we're in 1520 or whatever we are, around there, 15. I'm sorry, even past that. This is 1531, I think it is now. Why didn't they give the date in there? Yeah, I think it's 1530 or 1534. I'm not sure of the date right now, so it's unclear in my head. But anyway, but we've already, Spain has already sent Columbus and all that, all that whole scene is going on. So there's the new world out there. People are, traveling to these new lands. And Spain is doing very well. Now it's increased its size, because it has all the colonies over in South America, Mexico, and all these places. So this is a big deal. This is a huge expansion of the church, and Ferdinand and Isabella and good old Catherine are VIP 101, VIPs in the world, on the world scene. So now, very Catholic Henry from very Catholic England marries very Catholic Catherine of Aragon. So the arranged marriage. So this is going to be a good deal for at least England and Spain to, as Catholic countries, can work nicely together because we now have this marriage. So, okay. All right, so Henry's second son, Henry, who will be Henry VIII, his second son, only 17 at the time, was never considered likely to be a king. He was handsome, a popular youth who was a renowned wrestler, hunter, dancer, and womanizer. The life of this young man, however, would be forever changed by the death of his older brother. In order to save the Spanish alliance, young Henry was given to the older Catherine in marriage. Legally, a dispensation was needed, since Catherine was Henry's sister through marriage. Pope Julius II granted the dispensation, and the Spanish alliance was preserved through Catherine and Henry's marriage. Okay, so what does this mean? Okay, because the brother dies. Now in Judaism, this is kosher. This is called levirate marriage. If the brother dies, the next brother needs to raise up heirs. But I guess in the Christian experience, they dropped that one. And so now that Catherine was married in the family, it is his sister-in-law, and he needs a dispensation. Now, a dispensation is a ruling by a church authority, depending on bishop or a pope, that kind of breaks the tradition, breaks the law in a particular case, and gives a dispensation. So you're dispensed from what's normally supposed to take place. So that's the problem, though. It's on record that the Pope made a big decision giving Henry permission to marry his sister-in-law, to marry his sister, by marriage, okay, by his sister-in-law. Okay, so it's on record. Henry is now married to Catherine of Aragon. Everybody's happy, sort of. Now remember, Catherine is older. It was older brothers, and Henry was, 17, 18, 20, whatever he was. He has to marry now, Catherine, and they do. So they're married.
Yeah, can I?
Yeah.
Didn't Luther have a problem with this dispensation stuff that?
Dispensation.
Yeah, that the church was doing all these forgiving things for some people. And
Well, Luther, because now he's separated, he was the new pope, and he told that guy it was okay to have 2 wives. That's the little story that was in the couple of chapters ago, a couple of pages ago. So Luther gave his own dispensation.
Okay.
But this is a different situation. It was it was a bigamous marriage.
But what is the theological basis for that, with the Catholic Church? So in this situation, you talk about humanism, Catherine wasn't biologically his sister.
His sister, right.
But, so what?
Well, you can't marry your sister, that's for sure. You can't do that.
Well, yeah,
But
biological sister.
but you can, it's interesting, the church has permitted the marriage of cousins, first cousins.
Really?
Yeah, it can be done one time. And when you get this situation, there's a chart, right? You're supposed to name, you name who the bride and the groom are, and you gotta go back in their ancestors, and you look to see if there's another crossover. And if it's not 2 generations back, I think it is 2 or 3 generations. If it's 3 generations or more, you're good to go. But if you shared other aunts and uncles or grandparents, whatever it is, I don't know. I obviously never had the case these days. but
you never know, that might change.
I know, but in the old days, when people lived in the little village and it was, 20 miles to the next village.
It followed through.
And these are the kids you can marry. These are the girls that are available. And this is what these are the guys that are available. And so it happened a lot that cousins would marry. And but they didn't want to have it repeated 2 generations down. Yeah, try to mix the blood around. Well, this is what's happened with the royalty here, because they're constantly intermarrying all these. It's all this family.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all genetically it is. Yeah. So the church kept track of it, and I think it's 2 generations back. You can't have any mutual grandparents. You can do it one time, but if you go back another time or 2 and you see another few. Or then now these people are cousins, you're going to watch for that in their children, that they can't marry another cousin. So interesting.
No, but so then if you were married, that was the church looked at that like you were the sister, even though you weren't a biological one.
Well, your sister-in-law. It is a sister-in-law.
Yeah, and they just called it sister.
Yeah, sister. So, okay, so the marriage of Henry and Catherine at first was a happy one. Catherine gave Henry a daughter whose name was Mary. Okay, you gotta watch her now. Have you heard the drink Bloody Mary?
Really?
Okay. So that's where that drink came from.
Interesting.
Yeah, the name, yeah, the Bloody Mary.
Didn't know that.
The story?
Hmm?
Is the story Bloody Mary?
Yeah. Well, this is
No, the
going to be
drink-
Queen
the drink
Mary.
is
Queen Mary.
She's going to be Queen Mary eventually. And again, who's her mommy and her daddy? Well, her daddy is Henry, and her mommy is Catherine. Okay, so Catherine is seriously Catholic. How do you think Mary got raised? Seriously Catholic. Okay, so that's going to just keep that in mind. We're going to see how this, goes through time here. So Catherine has Mary. Okay, so other children soon came, including a number of sons, but all died before their first year. As Catherine grew older, the 35-year-old Henry realized he would not have a male heir. Now, he's 35, so that puts her, I don't know exactly, but probably pushing 40, obviously. She's a couple of years older. She's lost all these babies, and so Henry is obviously nervous about an heir. So he has to get a son. As Catherine grew older, the 35-year-old Henry realized he would not have a male heir. To complicate the problems, Henry's affections were drawn toward one of the Queen's attendants, Anne Boleyn. Henry began to seek a way to end his marriage with Catherine. Quoting Leviticus, King Henry asserted that Julius II had wrongfully granted a dispensation. So he says, look, God is punishing me. I don't have a male heir. I read this situation that it was bad that the Pope let me marry Catherine. Now I want that annulled, and I can marry Anne Boleyn. I want to do this. So Julius II had wrongfully granted a dispensation. So again, that's on canon law, church law. This is you already made one mistake or whatever. You went through a dispensation. You got a dispensation. So it's on record. You are married to her. So now Henry, God thinks God was punishing Henry for having taken his brother's wife by refusing him a male heir. Henry sent his legates to Rome and asked the Pope Clement, now we have Clement VII, for an annulment. Okay. I do a little sidebar all the time. I can talk about annulments. It is obviously one of the biggest issues in the church. So many families, so many people, and there's a lot to know about annulment. So I always take a break and I say, okay, any questions about annulment? Annulment does not mean Catholic divorce. Annulment means that at the time of the marriage, there was some kind of impediment or something hidden that wasn't known until later, okay? So basically I describe it as both people didn't have both feet on the altar. Somebody was hiding something or not being fully authentic, fully truthful, or fully free. There was some kind of other compulsion that got them to be married. Pregnancy is a big one. That's certainly a standard reason for why an annulment would be granted. So if there was a marriage and there was a pregnancy involved in the situation, if they get married, they got married, but obviously there was not full freedom there. There was already a child and do the right thing, all that. So sometimes it works out, obviously, sometimes it doesn't. So that's certainly one of the reasons to give an annulment. Another reason for annulment, there's 13 reasons. So it's not like you're swaying a jury. You need to just verify that you have one of the 13 reasons. I believe it's 13. All right, so you're not swaying a jury when you go to an annulment. You're just going to verify that this was taking place at the time of the marriage. So for example, one of the spouses intended, maybe, they were intending to be faithful. But at the time of the marriage, if it was shown that there was some infidelity already there, that somebody could report and say, well, there was somebody else, there was an involvement there, and it corrupted the marriage, it's destroyed the marriage. So there could be shown, okay, that one of the goods of marriage, the reasons for marriage, the benefits of marriage, the principles of marriage, there's three of them. Number one, fidelity, monogamy, permanence for all your life, and openness to children. Doesn't mean you have to have children or prove children, okay? So, for example, if somebody is then discovered to be infertile, and I want an annulment now from my wife who's infertile and I want children, that's not grounds. It just wasn't known. They're open to children, but now we see that it's not right, not possible. Kind of in this situation here, okay, not having children. Other cases I've had where they said they were going to have kids, we'll talk about it, we'll figure it out, and I ask them, I go through, that's one of the questions I have to ask, are you open to children? Yeah. And then down the road, it's like, no, we're not having kids. That is grounds for an annulment. Okay, that was a hidden detail that wasn't obvious. So, so the annulment process, it goes through inviting friends and family to give a little testimony. The person themselves has to write up their story. And what I always want to point out, annulment is not punishment. Annulment is in the church now because Jesus said we can't do a divorce. He says it all over this, in every gospel, it's there. And St. Paul makes a big deal about it. So we can't ignore it. So it's interesting that Protestants do. What can I tell you? They just say, just get married again. They don't have any process. So the process is supposed to be medicinal. It's supposed to be healing. It's not penitential, like I want to punish you. It is supposed to be healing. So please God, something happened in the marriage. We're going to see if you have one of these 13 reasons that the church grants the annulment. It's not on your conscience saying, I deserve another chance. I deserve a marriage. I want to be married again, and I'm going to do it. And nobody's going to tell me. That's not a good attitude.
How many people say that?
Oh, lots. Everybody. Most people. Most people. When the marriage fails, and if they don't do the annulment process. So that's some of the background. Now, when there is a separation and even a civil divorce, okay, as long as you are single, you have a right and a duty, and you really need to stay connected to church. A lot of folks think, because I got divorced, I can't go back to church. That's not true. You should go to Mass, and you should receive communion. The problem comes if there's a remarriage. That's where the problem comes. So you should go to Mass, and they're not put out of the church. No, we want everybody. If you're going through a separation or a divorce, you should be coming to Mass. Like I said, if it's a second marriage now, you've gone through something else, the church wants to say, we'll help you, but you need the annulment. We have to look at the annulment. So, so now if there is a marriage and one of the parties wants the annulment and the other one says, no, I'm not doing it, it doesn't inhibit the person from proceeding. That's another misfield. People aren't clear on that. You don't have to cooperate. You're invited, but you don't have to cooperate. Okay? So these are all little issues that people just don't know, and I like to go over them again. So when your families and friends, it comes up, you can hear some of these things. What's the other one? Pope Francis did, when he first became Pope, he eliminated paying for the annulment. Like there is
a big one.
There is
That
fees.
was a big one.
Yeah, there was fees. I think they reinstated payments again.
Of course.
I think they did. I don't know. I'm not positive on that one.
Do you know how much an annulment costs?
Well, it was around $1,500. And then I would always challenge people when they give them, of course they were not happy about it, whatever. I said, well, how much was your divorce? tell me how much your divorce was. And so the church has to go through a process. There's things that people need to be paid, that this is their job. It's called the tribunal, and it's the church court. So at in Rockville Center is where the tribunal is. There's 3 people on the tribunal. You don't have to be a priest. There are lay people and sisters that can be a judge. And again, what they're doing, they're not being swayed. They're just verifying that this is the situation. This happened. Okay. So another story happened for sure. Lots of people. One of the partners, one of the spouses, declares they're homosexual. So of course that's another issue. So yes, grounds for an annulment right there, so that the other person could marry. So there's all these things. So it's just verifying. The church wants to verify this is the situation and help the people process the hurt and the problem, so that you don't take the same issues into the next marriage. That's the idea. No. So my sister's gone through it, and it was helpful for her to kind of work things through from the first marriage. So so there you go. So annulment is a big deal for a lot of people. It's been a stumbling block for a lot of people. They got divorced, and now they feel like they don't belong to the church. Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
But you can't receive communion without.
But you can still go to mass. You still can go to mass. Now, if
Without
you're single,
annulment?
and you live in single life, yes, it's okay. Yes, you should have communion. So,
if Jesus says that once people are married, that's it. You never get married again. So why did the church go through this annulment thing? I mean, why did they institute that?
Because of the reality that people separate. And we can't call it divorce, because you know what a divorce is. Jews permitted divorce, and they do a process that they go through. Another reason too for if I hear in the preparation that they are doing a prenuptial agreement, then it automatically I have to stop the process right there. No, you have to get rid of the prenup. Wow. Because you're already thinking there could be a time when we separate. That's not a marriage. You're not intending marriage. You're supposed to be 100%, 100%, not 50-50. 100%, 100%. It's a covenant, so it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And so now obviously it's so casual and so whatever. It's people are in 3rd and 4th marriages and relationships, and it's a tough situation for the whole church. That with all the divorces and so the church tries to pastorally say we got to take Jesus' words seriously. We can't ignore them, and it's just say we're going to permit divorce. But so we say at the time of the marriage, it looked like a marriage. It sounded like a marriage. We even may have children from the marriage, but it wasn't a sacrament. It was a union, but something was wrong at the beginning. Therefore, you're free to
What
marry.
about the children? That was one of my friends has children, and she doesn't want an annulment because
It doesn't make the children.
It doesn't acknowledge the children from the marriage.
They're married. Well,
They're like bastardos.
No, there was a time in the church where they were considered illegitimate, but we've gotten rid of that too. We said no, they're legitimate. They're from a union, but it wasn't a sacramental marriage. It was a marriage. There was something there, that there was a union, but it wasn't a sacramental marriage. So that's what. Then the children are not made illegitimate at all now.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we changed on that. But back to the prenup. So if you have a prenup with somebody, it's not a marriage then, is that what?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. That's a violation from the beginning, from the start.
Presupposes
'Cause you're
not a total union.
Yeah.
You're putting that negativity out there that.
But we.
That's kind of interesting. I mean, it's just how many
Right?
prenups there are. I mean, there are a ton of prenups out there.
Yeah.
Pre-K anything.
I think for good
It does.
reasons, to be honest, but that's
Maybe
all
it doesn't come up.
I don't know yet.
Yeah.
I think it does. I think Jen and Adam, something came up in there.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be brought up by the priest. There's that you're intending. This is the problem now. Again, another anecdotal story, but it is a reality, and for people that all these couples that are living together. I always get them on that one. They're living together, and all right, I assume you're living together. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. So here's the deal: you have to think about this as you prepare for this marriage. You know, you come together, and another interesting little detail. When I get them in there, I want to see how long have they been living together. Okay, the church believes, and it was the best advice I got in the seminary, one of the best. If they come in at 6 months or less, or 2 years or more, and they're wanting to get married, you got to start asking questions. So the window of opportunity is like 18 months, 2 years. If they've been living together and dating for 5 years or 8 years or whatever, what's taking so long to get to the marriage? Now, there could be valid reasons. Well, I was in the army, I was in school, I was doing this, I was doing that, whatever. Okay, all right, that's a reason. But some of these folks, they've been living together. And I said, now, you trust her with your body. Yeah. And you trust him with your body and your soul. Yeah. Do you share credit cards? Of course not. All right, there you go, bingo.
Yeah,
It's a lot like that.
Yeah,
There's a lot like that, I agree.
of course. So if you're still living the idea that that's my toaster and that's your vacuum, watch out. You're going to have a problem getting married, living married life. So it's our toaster and it's our vacuum.
I know people who live like that are married.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Of
course. Yeah.
And you'll get payment from one or the other.
Yeah.
It's a
Right.
separate,
They both put their
separate.
money into the into the.
It's an issue. We bring it up at Marriage Encounter too. We warn people because again, you're living separate lives in lots of ways. So you sleep together, and you don't trust that stuff. Holy mackerel. Just to think about it, it's an issue. Anyway, so that's all. Any other questions on annulment? Because Henry is looking for one. He started the whole thing. Made a real big.
Taking that time. Thank you for explaining that. It should be explained more often.
Oh yeah, every time I get an opportunity, the issue comes up. I go through my little litany of you should know this, because people need to know this, and it has to be done within a year. Another little tidbit, some bishops back in the 60s, 70s, when annulment was, we really have to deal with this. It's a pastoral problem now as divorce has increased, and the church said some bishops would put the squish on it. They didn't want to do any annulments. And the church said, no, we're going to do it. The Pope said, we're going to do this, and whatever. The Vatican started pushing it. And we need to do this for the people. So some bishop would sit on it. So people would be waiting 10 years.
Wow.
So that was terrible. So the Vatican just said, you will do it by a year. So when you start to when you finish, it has to be declared one way or another.
You don't have to start the process as a
No,
divorce.
it can be done 10 years later.
The church has to have it done with it.
It has to be done. Once you petition, it has to be, you have to be the
Good
judgment.
question, Sue, because I wasn't thinking when you were
No,
saying
I was
that.
thinking
Right,
that
no,
the
yeah.
person who got divorced needed to do it within
No, not
a year.
within a year. No.
Okay, but let's say you get divorced, 10 years later you say, I need an annulment because
Right. I want to get married now.
And at that point, then
Right.
you have a year from that, whatever that new
It's up to the church to do it. They
Right.
have to process
Within-
it.
within
They
the
can't-
year.
Right.
The
You have
church
to have a
has to get their
determination.
paperwork done and
They have to
Got
get
it.
it all done. Well, the people.
Okay.
the
So they
people-
put a time frame on the church side to
Yeah.
do it.
Right.
Right.
Got it.
Does the church
Good question,
provide,
Sue. Thank you.
like, a booklet or something? Because I think this is really good information for parents to have to
Mhm.
share with their teenagers or their college students.
Yeah, there is. I'm sure they have some kind of little booklet or something at the tribunal that explains the process or whatever to go through. I haven't been in a parish in 20 years, so I don't know what's going on these days with it. I just refer people to their pastor. Or the deacons can process.
There's so many
paperwork.
things like this that we don't really know and understand.
Right.
I'd agree with you, Sue.
Yeah.
I don't think we talked
So
about
what
No,
can
we
you
don't.
say to people that you know, and I know many of them,
Mhm.
that what's mine is mine and what's his is his, and he'll pay this and I'll pay that. I said, how much does the car cost? I don't know.
Yeah.
No, there are
Well, it's a
people,
challenge.
a lot more than you think,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah. Challenge it.
So
just-
what could you
yeah.
say.
Yeah, just exactly that. You trust her with your body and soul, and
Okay,
now
so,
not your
yes, just say that
finances.
to them, yeah.
But
Yeah.
sometimes
But
marriages last forever. And
just
that's the
think
way
about
they
it. I
go.
mean,
Right.
again, they've worked it out. I mean, I'm not going to get involved in
Yeah.
to make
Yeah.
them do it. But just a question to raise: can you maybe there's
Sometimes
that's
people,
been something
even if
that's
you do love
blocking,
each other, you
in a
can use
blocking
that
your
as a
marriage.
weapon,
You know,
the money.
Yeah.
yeah. So it
So-
ought to be.
So money's first, God's second.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it is. That's what's, so you raise the issue. If you're friends and intimate enough that you want to get involved in it, just say, I heard the same. If you guys are living this way, there's a better way to live that really brings trust and love into
Advice,
more.
if they ask.
If they ask. And mind your own business. Of course, that's going to be the answer.
Because if they don't, I don't know that I'd go there.
Some marriages,
God's
some
not
marriages that act like that are second marriages, and they got burned on the first marriage, and it made them.
They got burned, or they each have children, and they have to think about that for the,
Yeah, well, that's also another thing. Who gets to inherit and all the inheritance stuff.
Yeah, I think that's I think, Sue, you put the elephant on the table. That's why,
Uh-oh.
no, and I mean,
Yeah.
most of us as parents, right, think of that money as being for their family, right. So it's not an issue that you're not trying to share it with your spouse.
Right.
You're really saying, hey, look, this is for my family.
Right.
And so I think in that respect, I think it's actually, kind of the mindset is we're looking at it the wrong way. We're looking at it as most people, I probably include myself in that, of looking at this as what I've earned over my lifetime.
Yeah, no.
Is really for me to, pass on to the next generation and the next generation. And if marriage at that point is being viewed as that's bad, I'm not sure that that's fitting with the perspective of many people of looking and saying, hey, this is for my family. And then you have kids, challenging it anyway. I mean, if you say, I mean, the reality would be you'd say, wait a minute, it's for the spouse, but the heir is for Kira, right? And the answer is, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to sue them, right? Or sue her, right?
Trying to share my inheritance.
Right. I mean, so the way we're
Welcome
kind
to
of
the family.
right. Because I mean,
This
I
is
think
a
that's
family. This is a
that's-
family situation.
I think
of
that's the
course,
way
yeah.
most of us are kind of, well, I'll speak for myself then. That's the way most of us have thought, is you earn money over your lifetime. It's really for you to give to your family, right?
Yeah.
And if someone were to come in at that last minute spouse and she were to take effectively their inheritance, the way that they look at it, that'd be problematic in a lot of ways.
Of course.
So I'm not sure that it has to do with not being.
The best people can do is try to clarify that, and make it known, and not a surprise, because at the end of the time, wow, it's really terrible. Seeing so many families break up with that stuff. So
Well, it's interesting. Is the only thing I'd say, kind of interesting. You look at some of the things we hear about in churches where priests were married, right? And then there was issues of who owns what, and a lot of times there's this discussion, at least in that they've made priests celibate solely because they didn't want to have that discussion.
of course,
who
yeah.
owned
absolutely.
what, right?
Father
And so-
Sullivan always said that in teenage.
Right, and so if you look at that as being an analogy, it's interesting that the church is kind of coming in and saying to you, Sue, or to you, Kira, or to me, hey, you can't look at your money as being your inheritance. You've got to look at that as money you're giving to your spouse. Open share, and I'm not sure. I mean, the interesting part is the church doesn't go that way. They basically said, "Ooh, we decided everyone needs to be celibate, so we don't have that problem."
And I think that's a big argument for
absolutely,
for
it's one of the
the-
reasons. Absolutely,
having
one
the
of the reasons.
priest be celibate, because imagine what would happen the first
I'm
time
gonna
a
make sure
priest
my
gets
kids-
divorced.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
Right.
that opens a whole
And the
big can
clergy,
of worms.
It
the
really
Protestant
does.
clergy have it all the time.
Right.
Of course, it's an issue for them.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right, let's
Okay,
get back.
sorry.
Let's get back to. We can talk on this forever. Let's get back to this.
Poor Henry.
Let's hear about poor Cardinal Wolsey. All right, so King Henry has a chancellor, Cardinal Wolsey. Okay, so chancellor is like a prime minister, or chancellor, or whatever. All right, so he's doing secular stuff. He's not just a clergyman. He's involved in the king's court here. So he's the legate. So the legate in charge of the annulment was Cardinal Wolsey, chancellor and the most powerful churchman in England. He had accumulated large benefices throughout England, and at one time strove for the papacy itself. So it says he's a mover and a shaker, okay? He don't sit around. And he had benefices. Benefices are when the church had property, it would be rented out to people, and the people would collect them, the church would collect the money, and he'd get just benefices. So it was a way for him to have income. We try not to do benefices these days. But if, the diocesan priests don't take, that's another thing to talk about, they don't take a vow of poverty. Okay, so diocesan priests are financially independent. So if they come from money, or they somehow make money along the way, it's their money. And they keep it and they give it to whom they want at the end of their life, Hopefully there's not children around, but whatever. Usually. Diocesan priests, right.
So it's like the Rockville Center, diocesan?
Yeah.
So they're very well off?
They're not necessarily well off. There's some very poor priests that have to live in a rectory their whole life because they don't have their own house. But some priests, for whatever reasons, had money, or somebody gave them money, and they can buy their own house. So some priests retire to their own place, or their own whatever, or they go, there's a place, Pius X's house is for the priests that don't have a place to go when they retire. So there's a retirement house in the diocese. So, but religious order priests, they are taken care of by their community. So if you're a Franciscan, a Montfort, whatever, all this, we take the vow of poverty, and which means any money that I get, I hand in. So we don't pay income tax, so we're not on the books as I get a salary. I don't get a salary. So anyway, that's the whole thing. All right. So anyway, so he's in charge now of this the annulment proceeding. Okay. So Wolsey was not a scholar trained in law or theology, but a skillful and pragmatic chancellor. A few years before, he tried to gain Henry the title of Holy Roman Emperor, and although he had failed, Wolsey's effort clearly showed him to be the most capable advocate for Henry's cause. Now, I didn't know that little detail there. The Holy Roman Emperor, guess who the Holy Roman Emperor is? Charles V. Okay, he's got the title. So he actually politicked to try to give it to Henry. And there's never been a tradition to have the King of England, the Holy Roman Emperor, So the Holy Roman Empire was a successor of the Byzantine Empire, and so it was always discussion who is the emperor of Rome, the successor of Rome. So in European history, you'll always have somebody claiming that I'm the successor of Caesar. So the Byzantine Empire. Remember, the whole problem for Rome was that the emperor left Rome. He's Constantinople. He started Constantine, went to Constantinople. So where the emperor, the Caesar, always was Rome until the 300s, early 300s. He wants a new location. Now that he's starting something fresh, a Christian community, he's going to start a whole new city because Rome was just a mess. So it still is. So Constantinople begins, and then he gets a bishop, a patriarch out there. But this is in the 300s. So there's always been this idea, who's the pope, who's the religious leader, and then who's the emperor. Now, it's going to come to, when you hear Caesar, then you should hear Kaiser. Kaiser in Germany was kind of saying, I'm the Holy Roman Emperor. It's always been whatever, okay, Kaiser. And then, of course, you get up into Moscow, and what do you hear up there? The Tsar. So these are all synonymous terms. They're all claiming empire. They're claiming empire. So Tsars, Kaisers, and Caesars, and Holy Roman Emperors. But Charles V is, seeing himself to be the Holy Roman Emperor. So that would have been fun if Wolsey would have pulled that one off to get the Pope to call him the Holy Roman Emperor. Anyway, it didn't work. So the guy obviously is in charge of, issues, political issues, moving and shaking the world. So Wolsey obtained permission from Rome to begin the trial for the annulment case in England. where he would be able to control the outcome. Okay? So, at first, he was given assurances from Rome that the decision would not be questioned, regardless of the outcome. So he said, whatever you decide will be okay. Right? And he's going to be in England, he's going to make the court happen, and he's going to do what he's going to do. He wants to serve the king. Okay? Since Pope Clement VII was a cautious man and realized that England might fall into schism over the issue of the annulment, he insisted on a legitimate trial for Catherine. He said, okay, wait a minute, we know this ain't good. Who am I listening to? You got Ferdinand Isabella over there, you got Charles the Fifth. This is all their family. Mm-hmm. And now you're disgracing the Queen Catherine. You know, she's the wife of Henry. And now you're going to throw her aside and get the young chick. Okay, this is an issue. Okay, this is an issue. So the Pope really senses that this is a big deal. This is empire. This is not just a marriage. This is empire, and a lot of things can happen. So, all right. So Clement also had to contend with Catherine's powerful nephew, Emperor Charles V of Spain, and so before judgment was reached, Clement ordered the case to be brought to Rome. So they must have started the trial. It didn't come to conclusion, and the Pope said, no, it's getting too hot. We got to do it in Rome. It can't be seen that just is in England, under English control. Henry VIII derided the Pope's refusal and declared Wolsey a traitor to England. Claiming that he was attempting to enforce the laws of a foreign ruler, the Pope, Wolsey was stripped of his power and ordered back to London to answer the charges. On this journey, the cardinal died in a monastery at Lister. God took him out of the whole, he was in a pickle. God took him home. It ain't gonna go well for him. And but he adds this little note, it's interesting. So on his journey, the cardinal died in a monastery. When Wolsey's body was prepared for burial, caretakers discovered that he had been wearing a hair shirt for penance under his splendid robes. So yeah, that's a penitential thing to do. It's very uncomfortable. You wear a hair shirt underneath.
What's a hair shirt?
It's made out of horsehair, and it's very sharp and scratchy, and so it's a penance to wear it. So you do it to the God, to offer your uncomfortableness, your pain, to God. So obviously he was in a spiritual pickle. Mm-hmm. He lived very big life. He had lots of money and lots of comfort and all the rest, but now he was found with a hair shirt. So it did show us that he was seriously pickled. I'm in between the Pope and the King, and this is a terrible situation for me to be in, and he ends up dying anyway. So,
what's the status of the Anglican Church now, today?
Well, that's a discussion we'll have to get to next week, but it basically, in 1890, there was an investigation into Anglican orders to see if there's validity of apostolic succession. And the Pope at the time, I think it was Leo XIII, with that investigation, did declare Anglican orders null and void. Okay, because what happened now, we'll get to it, but Henry is not dealing with sacraments. He don't care about that. He just wants a wife and an heir. That he's not theological and all that. But the next generation is going to go really Protestant. So Cromwell is going to be the guy that destroys all the churches, all the monasteries, all the stuff, and it's going to go very Protestant. So they said, we're not doing bishops. We're not doing apostolic succession. We don't believe in it. So there was a period of time, it seems, that they broke apostolic succession. And then when they wanted to go Catholic again, they just started up without connecting to the tradition, literally to the Catholic Church. So it could have been rectified had they, gotten some Catholic folks to, but now there's other discussions saying, well, maybe they didn't know all the information and some bishops could have come from France to re-Catholicize. It's a discussion right now. In fact, I have the papers in my hand. It was really fascinating. I was at the Bishops' Conference in DC when I was at Catholic U. the seminary. I worked in the Office of Ecumenism. And all these discussions, my job, I was volunteering. I just wanted to be around the place. And my job was to go through the files and take out doubles of stuff, just to shorten it. I'm like, oh my goodness, I have Cardinal Bay. This is the documents. This is the Anglican Catholic dialogue. So it was right here in my hands. Like, holy moly, this is cool stuff. I ended up spending more time reading this stuff than I did like, okay, throw that one out. And I was just sitting there, well, this is great. I have access to this. This is fascinating stuff. So there is, they have still not done it. And then there's complication now because women's ordination, that's a big issue. So, it's difficult. So everything's kind of quieted down. They're really not doing much with it lately. They're just everybody stay in your corner.